Classical socionics gave us a powerful image of the psyche, the mental ring, the vital ring, what stands in the light of awareness and what moves beneath it. For Model A, this was the visible structure, but Model L asks a deeper question. What if mental and vital are not the whole division? What if they are only two results of a deeper pattern? Cross what is explicit with what is implicit. Cross what we engage by default with what we engage only as an alternative. And the old twofold map opens into four: overt, apparent, persistent, tacit. Not two more Model A rings, but four vergences, four ways information appears, recedes, persists, and is engaged by the psyche. This video is about the two that Model A could show, and the two that were hidden in the structure all along. Last time, we mapped the four capacities: preeminent, foreground, and facile. The functions we readily use to meet the world and can sustain without strain. Auxiliary, foreground, but resistant, ready to engage, but tiring to hold in focus. Contributive, background, but facile. Not our usual interface with the world, but easy to sustain when called forward. Inferior, background, and resistant. Hard to bring forward, hard to keep there. Capacity tells us something essential: how available a function is and how much effort it takes to use. But capacity has a blind spot. Look at the radial positions. The positions Model A could not represent. They are more balanced than the central functions, less extreme, less lopsided, more supportive, and yet they do not all behave the same. Some appear clearly but are not engaged by default. Some remain implicit but keep working underneath. Capacity alone cannot explain that difference. So something else must be structuring the field, not strength, not weakness, vergence. So if capacity is not enough, what is missing? Capacity tells us whether a function is easy to bring forward and whether it can be sustained. But it does not tell us how that function appears in awareness, and it does not tell us whether the psyche engages it by default. That is the job of vergence. Vergence is built from two questions. First, is the information explicit or implicit? Does it stand clearly in awareness, or does it remain beneath the surface? Second, is it engaged by default or only as an alternative? Does the psyche naturally turn to it, or does it require a shift, a pivot away from the usual mode? Cross those two questions and the two old rings become four positions in a deeper map: explicit and default, overt; explicit but alternate, apparent; implicit but default, persistent; implicit and alternate, tacit. Mental and vital were not wrong. They were two corners of the full structure. The matrix gives us the formal structure. But the important question is what these four positions feel like in use. Overt is explicit and engaged by default. It is the part of the psyche that stands in the open, available to awareness, ready for direct use, and naturally involved in how the type meets the world. This is the old mental ring of Model A, but now it is no longer the whole conscious side of the psyche. Apparent is also explicit. It can be seen, it can be noticed, it can enter awareness clearly, but it is not where the psyche turns by default. It has to be engaged as an alternative. Persistent is the reverse. It is not usually explicit in awareness, but it keeps operating by default underneath. And tacit is both implicit and alternate. It is the old vital ring, present, real, and necessary, but usually beneath the surface and engaged only when the psyche pivots toward it. So vergence is not strength, and it is not value. It is the route by which a function enters the field of awareness, or remains working outside it. The first question behind vergence is simple. Does this function appear clearly in awareness, or does it remain beneath the surface? In Model L, this is the dichotomy of phenomenal state. Explicit functions are the ones whose information is more readily apparent to the type. They show up in awareness. They can be noticed, named, inspected, and consciously handled. Implicit functions are different. They are not absent. They are not inactive. But they do not usually present themselves as clear objects of awareness. They work more like background conditions, shaping the field, influencing the system, but not always standing in front of the mind. This is why vergence is not the same thing as strength. A function can be strong and implicit. It can be weak and explicit. The question here is not how capable is the psyche. The question is what becomes visible to it. Phenomenal state gives us the first axis of vergence. Explicit above, implicit below, what stands in the light and what keeps working in the dark. The second question behind vergence is not about visibility. It is about engagement. When this kind of information is present, does the psyche turn toward it by default, or does it have to shift into it as an alternative mode? In Model L, this is the dichotomy of modal engagement. Default functions are part of the psyche's ordinary route of operation. They are not necessarily stronger, they are not necessarily more valued, but they are where the system naturally goes. They form the default pathway, the track the mind tends to run on before anything has to be deliberately redirected. Alternate functions are different. They can still be available. They can still be important. They can even be explicit in awareness, but they require a pivot. The psyche has to turn aside from its usual path and engage them electively. So phenomenal state asked, what becomes visible? Modal engagement asks, what does the psyche naturally do with it? Default is the main track, alternate is the switching line. And when we cross this with explicit and implicit, the four vergences appear. Now we can put the two axes together. Phenomenal state asks, does this function appear clearly in awareness, explicit, or does it remain beneath the surface, implicit? Modal engagement asks, does the psyche turn toward it by default, or does it require a pivot, alternate? Cross those two questions and the four vergences appear. Explicit and default gives us overt. This is information that stands in the open and is engaged as part of the psyche's ordinary route. Explicit and alternate gives us apparent. This is information that can be seen clearly but is not where the system naturally goes first. Implicit and default gives us persistent. This is information that does not usually stand in awareness but keeps operating underneath as part of the default machinery. Implicit and alternate gives us tacit. This is information beneath the surface, engaged only when the psyche turns toward it. So the old mental and vital rings were not wrong, they were real, but they were only two corners of the matrix. Model L names the full pattern: overt, apparent, persistent, tacit. Now we can return to Model A. Classical socionics gave us two great function rings, mental and vital. In Model L terms, these are not discarded, they are relocated. The mental ring corresponds to overt vergence, explicit, and engaged by default. These are the functions that stand most clearly in the field of awareness and form part of the psyche's ordinary route of engagement. The vital ring corresponds to tacit vergence, implicit and engaged as an alternative. These functions are still real, still active, still part of the type, but they usually remain beneath the surface and are brought forward more indirectly, more electively, or in response to circumstance. So Model A was not wrong to distinguish mental and vital. The problem is that it treated those two as the whole division. Model L keeps them, but places them inside a larger structure. Overt and tacit are the visible inheritance from Model A. Apparent and persistent are what appear when the missing radial positions are added. That is the shift, not mental versus vital alone, but four vergences, four routes by which functions enter awareness, remain beneath it, or are engaged by the psyche. The first vergence is overt, explicit, and engaged by default. This is the part of the psyche that stands most clearly in the open. Its information is available to awareness. It can be noticed, named, inspected, and worked with directly. And the psyche does not need to pivot toward it. It is already there, on the main track. In Model A, this is what was called the mental ring, but in Model L, overt no longer means simply conscious, and it does not mean strong. An overt function can be strong or weak. It can be valued or unvalued. What makes it overt is not its power. It is its mode of appearance and engagement. It appears clearly, and it is engaged as part of the psyche's default route. So overt is the most direct vergence. The function stands in the light, and the system is already facing it. The second vergence is apparent, explicit, but alternate. This means the information can appear clearly in awareness. It is not hidden in the dark, it can be seen, it can be named, it can be inspected, but the psyche is not naturally facing it. To engage apparent functions, the system has to turn. It has to shift away from the main track and take up a different angle. This is why apparent can feel strangely available but not automatic. You may recognize the information, you may even see it quite clearly, but it does not feel like the place from which you normally operate. It is off-axis. Accessible, but not default. Visible, but not central. In Model A, this vergence had no separate place. It was one of the missing corners. Model L gives it a position. Apparent is the function at the side window, clear enough to see, but requiring a pivot to use. The third vergence is persistent, implicit, but default. This is the strange one. Because persistent functions are not usually standing clearly in awareness, they are not the part of the system you are looking at directly. They are not the illuminated console. They are the machinery below the floor. But they are still running, and more than that, they are running by default. Persistent functions shape the system from underneath. They influence the field before the psyche has explicitly noticed them. They are not hidden because they are weak. They are hidden because their work is already built into the operating conditions. So persistent can be easy to miss, not because it is absent, but because it is constant. It does not necessarily announce itself. It does not need to be deliberately switched on. It continues, it supports, it structures. In Model A, this had no separate place, but in Model L, persistent becomes visible as one of the missing radial vergences, implicit, default. The function works in the dark, but the system is already using it. The fourth vergence is tacit, implicit, and alternate. Tacit functions are beneath the surface. They do not usually stand clearly in awareness, and unlike persistent functions, they are not already running as part of the psyche's default route. They have to be accessed. The system has to turn toward them. A switch has to be thrown. A reserve chamber has to be opened. This does not mean tacit functions are unreal, and it does not mean they are powerless. In Model A, this was the vital ring, the part of the psyche that works more quietly, more indirectly, and often outside deliberate attention. But Model L gives it a sharper definition. Tacit is not merely unconscious. It is implicit and alternate. It is present beneath the surface, but it enters active use when the psyche pivots toward it. That is why tacit can feel strangely familiar, yet hard to hold in view. It is part of the system, but not part of the default line of sight. The function waits in the dark, and when needed, the system reaches down to bring it online. Now the four vergences can be seen as a complete set. Overt is explicit and default. The function stands in the light and the system is already facing it. Apparent is explicit and alternate. The function can be seen clearly, but the system has to turn toward it. Persistent is implicit and default. The function works in the dark, but it is already running. Tacit is implicit and alternate. The function waits in the dark and must be deliberately accessed. So the crucial difference is not strength, and it is not value, it is not even capacity. Capacity told us how available a function is and how long the psyche can sustain it. Vergence tells us something different. Does the function appear in awareness, and does the psyche engage it by default? That is why two functions can be equally strong, yet feel very different. One may stand clearly in front of the mind, another may operate underneath it. One may be the main track, another may require a pivot. Vergence is the pattern of entry, the route by which a function becomes available to the field of awareness, or continues shaping it from below. That is vergence, not strength, not value, not capacity, but the route by which a function enters awareness or continues working outside it. In the next video, we move to the next section of Model L, the Tract dichotomies, the current groups, and the question of what the psyche treats as a metabolic end.